In 1970, James Hansen proved the greenhouse theory to his scientific peers, but found communication to everyday people so frustrating that he became a street activist. And 40 years later, in 2011, he was arrested at a demonstration outside the White House. In 2019, 50 years on from Hansen's proof, we find Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion largely consisting of terrified and angry children begging adults to respect science. The kids understood and respected the science. The adults didn't. That is so the wrong way round. To sum up the situation, the 50-year-old peer-reviewed science has not yet convinced enough people, and extinction threatens the end of most life on Earth. Even for those who accept the science, there seems to be a veil between the words and what they mean for our children. This tragic impasse underlines that to progress action on climate and biodiversity, it is vital to understand the barriers to communication, the anthropology and economics of global crisis denial, and the paradoxes of the human mind that allow it. Douglas Adams, an author and environmentalist, in his sci-fi comedy Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, describes a vertical landing of a bistro in the middle of a match at Lord's. No one acknowledges it because it has such a high SEP rating. In other words, somebody else's problem. To acknowledge the anomaly means having to do something about it, like get psychiatric help. This is not an obscure allegory. We need to take serious note of selective blindness, a specifically human weakness that has nothing to do with ostriches with their heads in the sand. They are simply checking on their buried eggs. The Kantian argument to judge your behavior by the criterion that if everyone in the world behaved like you, the future would be safe, has not been generally compelling. Even David Attenborough and Jonathan Safran Foer, who try and convert others to planet-friendly diets, are too pusillanimous to make the change of diet themselves. You can't even say they should know better. They do know better. Do as I say, not as I do, just is not good enough in this context. Many say, why bother doing anything? It wouldn't make any difference, as the worst pollution is from China. In effect, this means they've given up and exist in a zone of cognitive dissonance where they claim to love their children, yet do nothing to save them. This cannot be comfortable. It is easy to see that the optimism of action offers the best escape from this dire mental condition. Oreskes and Conway in Merchants of Doubt describe a shamefully successful, large-scale and well-financed war of fake science waged by unscrupulous ex-Manhattan Project physicists against UN peer-reviewed climate science and any implied threats of genuine scientific discovery to the profits and investments of fossil fuels and toxic agronomy. Their weaponization of doubt induced a widespread information skepticism and climate passivity that lives on in the present. Marshall's study of climate denial and bias in Don't Even Think About It shows that the climate denial syndrome has become, like religion, a community-conformed and factually immune ideology, buttressed with irrationality, emotion, and short-term advantages and interests. The main constituents are confirmation bias, social taboo, peer group identity, sublimation of fear of personal mortality, fear of facing lost meaning and lost immortality through loss of future for descendants, fear of practical inconvenience and loss of income, power, or pleasure. The totality of this smorgasbord of fear, bias, and interest amounts to what I call a negative community. Like all such groups, it is Teflon-coated and immune to science. Political approaches have not yet succeeded. Our democratic representatives in the UK defy the common sense of survival. Heads of the National Trust, RSPB, and wildlife trusts, despite their non-political charitable constitutions, have been driven to threaten to urge millions of members to take to the streets against the new government policy described as an attack on nature. Currently in UK, power is tightly stitched to fossil fuel money, and this is even more true in the US oligarchy. Despite the availability of cheaper renewable alternatives, fossil fuel and nuclear investment prevails. We need a massively expanded environmental bandwidth of everyday people to attract politicians to treat this as the last chance for human survival. An unholy trinity. So far, I've been discussing the climate crisis, and now I wish to turn to the biodiversity crisis and specifically to the insect crisis. All three crises and many others are facets of a single Anthropocene nature crisis. Approaches to any of these soon lead you to the totality of connected problems and solutions. If we solve insect depletion, we will have solved biodiversity depletion and will be sinking megatons of carbon. It is increasingly evident that solutions need to come from many facets and sources. Small revolutions challenge everyday apathy. There are so many new things to do. Flower powering gardens, allotments, window boxes, parks and waste ground, wildflower bombing raids, lobbying councils against chemical and light pollution. In some situations, even laziness is an asset, with scruffination and no-mo. For everyday people, biodiversity may be the most accessible starting point, as positive actions are so readily identifiable. Why focus on insects? 60% of insects have already gone, and the situation is very urgent. Insects are possibly the most pivotal species on our planet for sustaining human life. Over 80% of the plants we eat depend on insects, as do copious microorganisms and others up the munching ladder. In brief, plants, humans, birds, bats, and other animals are crucially dependent on insects for pollination, food, soil, recycling, and pest control. Helping insects means restoring biodiversity and vice versa. Insect messaging provides vital insights into biodiverse interdependency. Insect conservation is hobbled by insect phobia, inherited bad associations and feelings that insects are merely to be swatted, and in addition, a suspicion that an adult interested in insects is mentally unhinged. Insect depletion as a looming planetary catastrophe seems to many like yet another boring and depressing conspiracy theory. What to do? Conservation recruitment research finds the best emphasis is to stress human-insect codependence, but that an intrinsic appreciation of insects can last longer. Research also recommends oblique approaches. Engaging the public in creating floral insect habitat attracts flower lovers. Bird lovers can conserve swifts or martins by saving insects. Butterflies and bees can be insect pollinator ambassadors. It is argued that if we look after these aesthetic aristocrats, then the proles, for example, flies, wasps, and beetles, will piggyback on habitat improvements made for the lords of the manor. This approach and bee mania gives away too much, I think. It is crucial that people understand what less charismatic insects do for us. It is practical to start in the city because, as an individual planet choices are made by city dwellers, the fragmentation of urban land ownership allows a colourful wave of fluorescence across the city. Everyday people can make incremental gains in their gardens, detoxing lawns and changing mowing and planting patterns. Communal and individual citizen virgin planting of trees and flowers activates agency, improves optimism, and reconnects nature to everyday city dwellers. Beautifying cities with trees, flowers, and nature, and sinking carbon. What's not to like? The urban conservation zone is a coherent and practical tactic and an optimistic story. 1% of the world is urban. This huge area can become a Noah's Ark in which we conserve insects, flowers, and biodiversity. Later, when we have detoxed the countryside, these species will rapidly recolonize the rural world. The saga approach. The inevitable riposte to the negative community of denial to maintain scientific rigor and build a more attractive, positive community. And with pleasure, fun, sanity, and communal action, democratically take down the vested interests and recruit the denial zombies. By combining science, art, games, and action, the four elements in the saga molecule, we are exploring ways to grow an attractive, issue-based community. Science is presented in its most publicly accessible form by scientists as stories stripped of gatekeeper vocabulary. At events, we feature information pop-ups checked by leading entomologists, which start educational conversations. Art is free of charge and accessible to everyday people in public gardens, street museums, parks, schools, and universities. Art becomes a microscope as specific giant insects dance with children and adults and explain the insect issue. Games become learning tools and community magnets. Our giant painted lady jigsaw captivates teams of up to 14 people to learn about this butterfly. In Preston, 2 jigsaw doers have previously purchased on eBay actual painted lady butterfly release kits, while knowing virtually nothing about this amazing insect. Action by individuals and groups means doing something practical about the planet. We are currently focused on insect-friendly urban planting. Permissions often include an insect depletion conversation lesson for gardeners and council officials. The action is enjoyable and leaves a legacy of flowers and first-time gardeners. When we cannot plant, we give away pollinator plants as rewards for questionnaire responses and research data. Those pulmonaria and campanula will have good homes. Kate Soper's alternative hedonism challenges us to have more pleasure and fun as environmentalists, enjoying pollinator cities full of trees and flowers, with clean air, plant-based food, art, and organic wine, rather than, say, eating deforestation steak or the last fish in the sea in a private jet. Since 2021, the street theatre company Neighbourhood Watch Stills International has taken the saga approach with Project Urban Oasis on the road. Planet Action Street Arts is our new charity. 3,808 insect-friendly plantings have been made, 150,000 total participants. A host of new organisation networking connections are powering up for 223. Art and Biodiversity Festival, June 4-5-6, 2022, was launched with a 3-day pop-up fine art Insectibition, starring the amazing 3D insect embroidery sculpture of Zipporah Johnston. Zipporah is a neurodiverse, monotropic, autistic, artistic genius. Her exceptional focus, monotropism, includes an intense fascination and amazing representation of endangered insects. Her work was featured in a BBC series about artists of the environmental crisis. It will not take long before people forget the normal mass of dead insects on the windscreens of cars crossing the UK or Europe in the summer. However abnormal it may initially seem, it does not take long for humans to mentally accept a new normal. This new normal, with very few insects, threatens the world with drastic food loss and the collapse of the ecosystem that supports humans. The visibility of the insect absences in Zipporah's triptych is a time-limited warning. Her art helps us to remember and see absent insects. The white shapes are the absences, and the third plate is a warning of what might come to pass. Due to our codependence, those white blanks might as well include a human shape. At the other end of the scale, we featured Churchill award-winning macro photographer Ed Hall, fresh from his Leeds exhibition. His enormous images of insects let everybody look down the microscope with awe. In an art exhibition, even the insect apocalypse can attract attention. That is the saga approach. We hit the pause button on the festival and headed down to the nearby Summerhill Park to a carefully prepared site. Here we planted around 800 pollinator plants in an hour or so, with giant musical insects in attendance. A child will keep an aphid pet on the end of her finger all day. While children generally love insects, adults don't. Children also experience planting a flower with profound gravity. The implication is that we must find the child in everyone. Matthew Oates, author of His Imperial Majesty, a recent book on the Purple Emperor butterfly, wrote on seeing our giant street version, "Wow, I love it so much I could scream. You've more than made my day." The power of art has greatly facilitated our multifaceted collaborations with the leading insect experts of the UK, who have also checked all our information and joined our online groups. The communication task is not for science per se. However, scientists are people, and thank goodness they can also be artists, authors, and popular communicators. David Goulson is Professor of Biology at the University of Sussex, England, and a Hubble Bee expert devoted to the ecologist. conservation of insects. He is the celebrated author of several books, including Bee Quest, Sting in the Tail, Guarding for Bumblebees, Guarding for the Planet, and his most recent, Silent Earth, Averting the Insect Apocalypse. Dave gave a free public talk for us for our insect superhero lecture, Gardening for the Planet and Insects. He confided to the 180 people present that our art of giant insects initially attracted his participation. It was a very helpful public endorsement of the saga method, as it showed the magnetic influence of art in helping attract our top communicators, as well as convening our issue-based community. Conclusion: let's do our best to make this lovely blue planet once again habitable for our children, grandchildren, other animals, and life forms. Negative community conformism paradoxically presents hope and opportunity. If we can change the direction of that conformism with attractive new community, we could cascade positive action for the planet. Community events and their legacies are crucial. Rational thought and logic need to find their places in the human psyche, alongside empathy, imagination, beauty, humor, stories, intuition, friendship, and love. These are all art in all its myriad forms. Art, including gardening, could be the keystone. Disciplinary initiatives, which I see springing up in apps of the future and everywhere, inspire me with hope that our communities of good humour, resolve, and action will overcome well-financed denial, and everyday people will compel their governments to take all the steps to put our beautiful planet on the road to recovery.